Chapter 14. Now it happened that in Iconium they entered together into the synagogue of the Jews, and spoke in such a way that a large number of both Jews and Greeks believed. But the Jews who were disobedient stirred up and poisoned the minds of the Gentiles against the brothers. So they stayed there for a considerable time, speaking boldly for the Lord, who testified to the message of his grace, granting signs and wonders to be performed through their hands. But the population of the city was divided, and some were with the Jews, and some with the apostles. So when an inclination took place on the part of both the Gentiles and the Jews, together with their rulers, to mistreat them and to stone them, they became aware of it, and fled to the Lycaonian cities Lystra and Derbe, and the surrounding region, and there they were continuing to proclaim the good news. And in Lystra a certain man was sitting powerless in his feet, lame from birth, who had never walked. This man listened while Paul was speaking. Paul, looking intently at him, and seeing that he had faith to be healed, said with a loud voice, "Stand upright on your feet." And he leaped up and began walking. And when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they raised their voices in the Lycaonian language, saying, "The gods have become like men, and have come down to us." And they began calling Barnabas Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the principal speaker. And the priest of the temple of Zeus that was just outside the city brought bulls and garlands to the gates, and was wanting to offer sacrifice along with the crowds. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard about it, they tore their clothing and rushed out into the crowd, shouting and saying, "Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men with the same nature as you, proclaiming the good news that you should turn from these worthless things to the living God, who made the heaven and the earth, and the sea and all the things that are in them, who in generations that are past permitted all the nations to go their own ways. And yet he did not leave himself without witness by doing good, giving you rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying you with food and your hearts with gladness." And although they said these things, only with difficulty did they dissuade the crowds from offering sacrifice to them. But Jews arrived from Antioch and Iconium, and when they had won over the crowds and stoned Paul, they dragged him outside the city, thinking he was dead. But after the disciples surrounded him, he got up and went into the city, and on the next day he departed with Barnabas for Derbe. And after they had proclaimed the good news in that city, and made many disciples, they returned to Lystra and to Iconium and to Antioch, strengthening the souls of the disciples, encouraging them to continue in the faith, and saying, "Through many persecutions it is necessary for us to enter into the kingdom of God." And when they had appointed elders for them in every church, after praying with fasting, they entrusted them to the Lord, in whom they had believed. And they passed through Pisidia and came to Pamphylia. And after they proclaimed the message in Perga, they went down to Attalia, and from there they sailed away to Antioch, where they had been commended to the grace of God for the work that they had completed. And when they arrived and called the church together, they reported all that God had done with them, and that he had opened a door of faith for the Gentiles. And they stayed no little time with the disciples.